Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's early, but it means that you actually got into the room and they didn't shut the door, so that's nice. Just so a few things. We will, as everyone knows, we don't do questions from the audience, but I have put a slide so that you can direct message me via Twitter, and we'll do our best at the end to take questions, but then we also can see you outside and answer any questions following. So it is my great pleasure to be on the stage with these three amazing journalists. I am Farah Warner, Vice President of Practice Change at Solutions Journalism Network. And I'm gonna have each of you just say your name and where you're from so that I don't need to do that for you. So.
Hi, I'm Sahana. I'm from India, one of the hotspots for climate change, and I'll take you through how we are investigating response to climate change through journalism.
Hello, I am Garcia-Ajofrin from Reuters, and I am from Spain. And I'm going to talk about some stories that we work with Reuters, that we are a collective of journalists working with designers and photographers and developers. And I'm going to explain how we can engage the audience using innovative formats about climate change.
Okay, no, it's okay. Hi, my name is Merle. I'm an Italian journalist. I used to be a National Geographic contributor for at least 20 years. But finally, 4 years ago, I decided to switch myself and my profession onto an independent position. So I built up a project called Adaptation. It's an evocative name because it comes from, climate change adaptation, which is, in my opinion, a new way to face this big journalistic challenge. I mean, to tell stories about climate change in a different perspective. Let's say in a very constructive perspective.
Great, thank you very much. Let's get started. We're gonna to ask me questions, please feel free to direct message me at Farah Warner on Twitter, and I'll be watching.
I think we need to see the slide, no? Okay, now.
Oh, thank you. So to ask questions, just direct message me. It also now means that you can follow me and I can follow you. All right, I'm gonna go very quickly, but I want everyone to understand what we do at Solutions Journalism Network. We didn't create solutions journalism. We didn't make it. People have been doing solutions journalism, or I know here in Europe, constructive journalism for many, many years. And definitely people who are underrepresented, never represented, or misrepresented in the media have been doing solutions-based journalism for a very long time. But for us, we say that solutions journalism is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. So we have a 4 pillars framework for solutions journalism. What is the response? What's the evidence of effectiveness of that response? What are the insights that a community member, a reader, a listener, a viewer can gain from engaging with that content? And most importantly, what are the limitations of that response? So just more quickly, just to dig a little bit deeper. So solutions journalism, you need to cover the response to a problem. If the problem isn't well known in your community, even if the problem's well known worldwide, but it isn't really understood directly in your community, you may still need to cover the problem. But what we're looking for is a response to the problem and how it happened. The next, as I said, it provides evidence of impact and looks at effectiveness, not just intentions. In climate change, we have a lot of promises and a lot of nice intentions and good intentions, and what we need is action and evidence. And we're looking for both qualitative and quantitative. So as I said, this must produce insights. So this would help others respond to adaptation, mitigation, and resilience in climate change. And finally, pointing out the limitations. As we say, failure is okay. It's okay to fail in solutions journalism. In fact, we have an entire category called instructive failure. Pilots with very little evidence can also be solutions journalism, but we need to be clear that they are pilots, they are tests. Why I believe that this approach is critical to climate change. So over the past probably 10 years, I think we have been seeing a major shift in the way that the world thinks about climate change. Pew Research shows that 72% of people in 17 countries are somewhat concerned or very concerned that climate change will affect them personally at some point in the future. And I should change the slide to say at now, not in the future, now. But what we do in the news coverage is we deactivate readers at a time when communities do need to take action. So following last year's IPCC report, an analysis by the research firm Acos revealed 79% of the headlines on the 25 of the most linked to news sites evoked fear, hopelessness, and/or a feeling of being overwhelmed, which means that people avoid that kind of news. They turn it off. Only 10% actually had a neutral headline, 6% evoked hope, and only 5% alluded to a solution. So today we're going to hear from 3 journalists who have been working in this space for a number of years to how do we stop covering climate as something that is unsolvable and apocalyptic and move to rigorous evidence-based solutions reporting that actually catalyzes our communities to take action. So Sahana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Farah, and thanks all for giving us a packed house. It's great to see all of you here, and I'm hoping for a lot of engagement after the session. So I'll take you through what we at Mongabay, India, have been doing to investigate response to climate change through journalism. Now, Mongabay, India, we sort of came into being in 2018, and as part of the larger Mongabay.com, we exclusively focus on environment and science, conservation science as well. And in that, when we were reporting on climate change, what we realized was that a good chunk of stories were on the problem, what causes climate change, reporting on the science of it, which was, absolutely necessary, which is absolutely critical. But what we realized was there was a need to also write about the response, about investigating a response, what India is particularly doing to tackle climate change. And also what we realized is that media coverage often sort of has a bias towards countries such as India, where it's mostly, the news that you read is XYZ happening in India, and this is an unsolvable problem. But there are so many examples of resilience, so many examples of how communities, how governments are taking action. And at the same time, there's also a need to critique, a critical appreciation of these responses. So there are, the former slide. So there are about 4 to 5 ways in which we've been doing this since 2018. We've looked at women and environment. We've looked at women's agency and environment. Now again, women are most often portrayed as victims, of climate disasters. And of course, they are disproportionately affected, which we know for sure. But then we've also had numerous instances where, they have shown resilience, they have adapted, and they are the ones who are spearheading various kinds of responses to climate change. And it's important for us to also explore that side, to also explore women's agency and environment. So we have a whole series exploring just that, women and environment. We call it Environment and Her. And and recently, just in the last 6 months, we've got a special reporting project on climate mitigation, where we are looking at how India plans to reduce emissions, how India plans to sort of cut back on its emissions, and how is it sticking to its targets that it has promised under the Paris Agreement and also under the Glasgow Pact. So that whole gamut of stories comes under mitigation as well as adaptation. The other sector, which falls under mitigation is renewables, land and forest sector, and of course communities. So renewables Energy, clean energy, these are the buzzwords today. And if you look at it in the context of response to climate change, there's a whole lot of storytelling, range of stories that you could do. And there's a lot of variety and diversity of sources that you can also bring on when you look at renewables as a response to climate change. And as Farah said, there are stories of failures which are also important in the context of response. And in fact, we've looked at failures, where a solar power plant has caused problems to the community instead of sort of solving the issues, So where does it take us? How, to what extent are renewables or so-called green energy actually green? So we've been investigating this through a solutions approach. And the land and forest sector in India provides journalists with innumerable stories. I mean, every part of India that you touch, there's land conflict, there are land issues, there are forest-based communities, indigenous communities, and they are part of the response to climate change. But are India's policies also burdening these communities? When India says that, we are going to stick to this target. So we've been investigating this gamut of thinking, this line of thinking as well. And of course, like I said, communities are at the center of so many of our stories. And in the context of communities, what's also important is science and technology. While we've looked at the science and technology in cases of, detecting climate change or what is climate change, emissions, the science of emissions, what causes cyclones, how rapidly is the Indian Ocean warming. So all that falls under science and technology. But what we've also looked in terms of response in science and technology is what are some of the solutions, science-driven solutions that India is bringing in its response to climate change. So there's like a whole gamut of stories or themes that we've been broadly exploring, and we're going to magnify this. I'll take you briefly through one of the most key verticals in this, the women and environment one. We call it Environment and Her. We started with the idea in 2019, and then, when we wanted to scale up this vertical, so I applied for a grant with the Solutions Journalism Network, and my proposal was that we would work with writers across India, and we would get these stories out for our readers from various parts of India. So when we scored that grant, we managed to do about 8 to 9 quality stories. We got to also train reporters in using the solutions approach. And that's really made a difference in terms of journalism, in terms of storytelling, because a lot of our writers came back to us and told us that, okay, we hadn't thought of this story in this way. And at the same time, I want to reiterate that there's this sort of misconception that solutions journalism doesn't talk about problems. It's actually not quite appropriate. I think it talks of problems, but in a more nuanced way. It gives you a lot of freedom to explore, how responses are working, the successes, the failures, what's working and what isn't working. And in fact, what really is amazing in the Indian context is a solution to one problem, for example, might create a problem, in the other context. So there's a lot of scope when you apply a constructive journalism or a solutions approach to climate change stories. Then we have a specific series on nature-based solutions. Now, nature-based solutions is a buzzword, but when it comes to storytelling, how do you mainstream nature-based solutions? So mainstreaming nature-based solutions in the media for audiences, who might not be keyed into these, climate policy buzzwords is a huge challenge. And then there's a challenge because you have to get it translated and adapted into vernacular, into regional languages. Otherwise, you're just sort of catering to only one segment of readers who understand English. So we do have a Hindi desk, which is one of the most prominent languages spoken in India. And they also adapt these stories on nature-based solutions. In nature-based solutions, we have investigated a lot of failures that come with tree plantations, for example. So we've used data visualization. We've done a lot of stories on farmers switching to organic farming and then realizing that even organic farming, if not done correctly, has pitfalls, or what are the barriers to scale up organic farming. So do take a look at the vertical on nature-based solutions. It is one way of writing on climate mitigation. We've tackled a lot of concepts like carbon sequestration, which again, mainstreaming for an audience is quite challenging. What are the examples of carbon sequestration? We've written about mangroves in India. India has one of the largest mangroves cover in the world. The Sundarbans mangrove, if you've seen the photos, they're beautiful in the Bay of Bengal Delta, spanning India and Bangladesh. So the mangroves are under attack from climate change because of the eroding coastline, sea level rise, and a whole lot of human-caused pressures. And the mangroves, we need the mangroves to also save us from the impacts of climate change. So there's a dichotomy in the kind of stories that you also get to tell in different geographies across India. And India is also, it has a lot of biodiversity hotspots. So when you're writing on climate change, you inadvertently also end up writing on biodiversity. So biodiversity journalism also is another way to look at response to a specific challenge, environmental issues and climate change issues. So I'll, next slide, the slide.
This one?
Yes. So this is a very interesting story. This is a photo essay which one of our writers in India got us, and he was on the field. He was interacting with farmers, and he had been examining how this farmer had switched to organic farming in response to changes in the local microclimate. And then, what did he find out basically after switching to organic farming? So this photo essay sort of tells us what this farmer actually found out. So it's an experimental kind of a thing, and it's very interesting if you give it a read. So this is one of the stories in our nature-based solutions or eco-hope vertical that we have. The last aspect that I want to leave you with is science and technology. I'm a science journalist, and a lot of our stories are evidence. Most of our stories are all, they have element of science in them. And explaining climate science, as you would know, is again, is challenging, and there's always a constant tussle between scientists and journalists. If we simplify science, it's not too pleasing for them, and then we need to really simplify science and break it down because we are catering to our readers, of course. And so tackling that whole conflict between scientists and journalists has been an interesting experience, and we've got a lot of media savvy or media trained scientists in India who are also helping us understand the science better, because understanding the science better also gives you a good way to navigate climate policies. So there's like a whole lot of stories on climate science that you could go through, especially on extreme weather events, because that's one of the ways that also catches readers' attention, and especially responding to extreme weather events. The solutions to tackling impacts of extreme weather events is a very interesting way to tell stories on climate science. You can weave in climate science, climate policy, a lot of data, but not too overwhelming for the readers, and also get in community members, get in the voices of the communities who are at the front lines of extreme weather events and who are also part of solutions to the impacts of extreme weather events. So the learnings that we had, from all of this is contextualizing your stories is very important, because just from India, from an Indian perspective, the context change from state to state, district to district. From northern part, you have the Himalayas, you have the Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, you have Western Ghats, you have deserts, you've got so many landscapes. So landscape-based storytelling helps us contextualize the solution and the response that we are investigating. number one. The second part is caveats. A good solution story usually we found has caveats, which tells you that, okay, this is a solution, this is a response, but when does this response really work and when it doesn't work? So I think having the caveats there is also very important. The other part is accuracy of information. So in a world of climate misinformation, we do believe that inoculating the public against misinformation is important, and providing accurate information is one of the first steps to do so. Attribution to climate change, climate science, specifically if you're reporting on extreme weather events, responses to the impacts of extreme weather events, you have to get your attribution correct. You have to be sensitive and inclusive. That's what we found out, that when we added the gender dimension in our stories, it sort of changed a lot of things for us, in the sense that we began to look at stories more sensitively. What kind of quotes we were attributing to the community, especially women, how were they represented in the media. These kind of sensitivities are really important in climate change storytelling, and of course inclusivity. When we investigate a response to a problem, I think it automatically brings in a lot of change in storytelling, right from scientists, from policymakers, to communities, to government officials, lawyers, and citizen activists and citizen scientists. So what have you? You have the whole community covered when you are investigating response to climate change. So thank you for being very patient listeners. And as Farah said, you can put in some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sahana. Just so everyone knows, I'm not doing this as a typical panel, which you may have realized this. Each person will get a significant amount of time to talk about their work. So this is not going to be a Q&A panel. Their work is so important that I don't need to step in between it. So now we're going to move on to Lola. The floor is yours.
Hi, Flo. So I would like to talk about a way that we can engage audience on climate change, because sometimes we think that if we report about data or complicated stories, we cannot combine that with an innovative design. And I would like to give the example of 4 articles that we did in Outriders. For those who don't know the work that we do, we usually combine a comic or designers or different multimedia approach with international information, scientific information. So we try to do all this knowledge closer to the audience. And one of the stories that we did recently, it was what we call climate postcards. And we decided to do some solution journalism stories about different initiatives that there were taking place in different countries in order to fight climate change. Small responses, as Farah explained very well, sometimes they are not the only solution, but there are people who are doing efforts to change their environment. And what we did, it was interviewing, like a normal article, these people in these communities that they were doing some actions. And we combined that, working together with a watercolorist. So we decided that if we are going to send a postcard to the audience, it needs to be like a postcard. So we combine watercolorist artists with a normal journalism approach and a newsletter. So every 2 weeks, during 7 months, we send to our readers a postcard from a different community that was fighting climate change. And we explain a lot of beautiful stories. I remember now in the north of Nigeria, a community that was building wells for some towns. And what this organization did, it was on Twitter. They posted, built a well, and they asked the community if they can help with something. So one of the, I don't know if we can see the slide, the first one about the postcards. I think it's the previous one. Oh yeah, the first one that we see, when we worked with the painter, we give them the interview and all the information, and he painted this beautiful postcard with these Twitter birds and the village. The second one is urban agriculture in Lima, and the same, we work with an organization that was working in urban agriculture in Peru, and later we paint that, and the other one is in Netherlands, which is the countries with more bicycles. We can see here how it works. This is the Outriders website, and we are going to see how we did it. And with this example that, to be honest, we never expected that so many people is going to join the newsletter. We realized that people really want to read responses from other communities, and they want to learn from them. And sometimes it's not just to say we are going to write something positive. It's not that. In this case, we really try to use journalism solution approach with some limitations, with some evidence, including data, but of course giving to the audience something that is appealing for them. Another example that I would like to mention that we also combined working on the field, like in other story, but combining an innovative design and some multimedia, and some multimedia materials. It was I was in Sri Lanka for a year and a half, and one of the stories that many people told me there, it was the big conflict that there are between human and elephants. And for those who don't know, Sri Lanka is the country with the highest population of elephants. It's a country that in the 60s had 8 million people, and right now there are 21 million people. And at the same time, there are 6,000 elephants. And in some areas, they are living together. So cohabitation is very difficult. And per year, in the case of 2019, 400 elephants were killed. That is a lot if we think in the case of India, with the high population of elephants too. I think it's 100, or about 100 elephants that are killed. In Sri Lanka, there are 400 elephants killed every year. And at the same time, about 100 people died in the human-elephant conflict. But I didn't want to write about this problem because many people already know that many elephants are killed in Sri Lanka, and I don't think I'm going to solve anything if I'm going to write that. But attending to a conference with an organization, they talked me about Dr. Fernando, who was an expert who was working for 20 years in Sri Lanka with an idea that it was, instead of put the elephants in a closed area and fencing the elephants, why not we fence the people and the corpse so the elephants are not going to attack them? And I decided to interview him and to visit the communities and to write about this story with a solution approach. And what I realized is that there are many people trying to solve this problem. In this case, I was writing about three different solutions, but I think we can learn a lot about the communities, and it's very important when we, as a journalist, when we write an article, to really spend time with the local communities. Sometimes we tend to interview the experts in the urban areas, or to focus on the people who write the reports that are also important, but we don't know what the communities that are facing these problems think, because it's very easy to say people in Sri Lanka are killing 400 elephants, but for people who are living every day with this conflict, and the only thing that they have is a farm, and every day the elephant come and eat the grass of the farm, it's not so easy. So it's better to also spend time with the local communities and to see what they are doing to facing the problems, and why sometimes they are looking for a solution and maybe they don't have the resources. So this is one of the stories that we also did, and I think we have a video, yes. And this is the final story that we did with this design, and it's a multimedia article, and I think another key of Outriders and the work that we do is that is very cooperative. This is a story that I did the reporting part, but the result wouldn't be like that if I wouldn't work with the people that I work, because here I work with Sirisa, who is a filmmaker from Sri Lanka. I work with Tina Shu, who did the design, Piotr, the development. So this is another part that as reporters we can change the way that we do journalism. Sometimes we think that alone we can cover a story, but if we suddenly cooperate with a painter or with a designer, in our case, we were people from Spain, Poland, Sri Lanka, and China. If we put together all these different talents, we can get different stories that can engage the audience. Another example that I would like to mention today is a story, I think, okay, sorry, we can't, yeah, that we did about the repairers. Probably you know that there are many people that are trying to get the right to repair. That it means when we buy a laptop or a cell phone, probably the life is 2 years, and it's more and more difficult to repair our computers or our technology. So there are many amazing initiatives of people who are gathering together, and they are trying to learn from others to repair their tools. So I covered this story with Illustrator, but what I did, it was to visit an amazing initiative in Madrid with an organization who is collecting all the computers from some companies, but what they are doing is teaching some children and teenagers in Spain that they are from migrant background and they cannot attend to formal education and they don't have a job. So they are, with these computers, they are training these teenagers. They are learning to repair computers, and they are donating these computers to the people in the neighborhood that cannot afford a computer. So it's a very amazing circular initiative. And here we work with this illustrator in a way that we can explain the story with a lot of data again, but in a more appealing way. And the last one is about biopiracy. I think is, well, this is the repairers. We can. And something that I found very interesting when it happened the same when we did a comic about people in favelas in Brazil trying to help the community during the pandemic. When you interview people in communities that usually are represented as victims in media, and suddenly they are heroes in a comic, it's not only good for the reader, it's also for them, see them as heroes in a comic is something that can make them to do more things for the community. So you can help both sides. And the last story that I would like to mention is about biopiracy. I wrote about the case of Sri Lanka, but later I include 4 solution stories about countries that are fighting biopiracy, like India. That is amazing what they are doing, because they have a lot of natural medicine that for years it was working well. Sahana knows more than me about that, but for years, for centuries, it was working in the country. But suddenly some companies were interested in these remedies, and what they decide is to put everything online in a library. So since now it's not something novel, because it's already online, nobody can say that this is their formula. And what we did here different, it was like we use a botanic book style to write this article. So we write the article, but with the style of the old botanic books. So it was a different way to present it to the audience. And with that, what I would like to say is sometimes we are afraid to cooperate, but I think the only way to do journalism is cooperation right now. Cooperation with people from different communities, cooperation with people from urban and rural areas, because this is another thing. Sometimes we think that cooperate is just with people from different countries, but sometimes these people from different countries have the same background that you. They are people from, who attended to universities, they are people who attend to the same conference than you, and finally, it's not so representative, although you think they are. So I think cooperation is the key, and cooperation between different fields. Maybe if you explain in your newsroom that you are going to cooperate with a watercolorist, maybe they are going to think that you are crazy. But it's a way to show that we can do different things and to engage the audience in the real solution that we want to show. And this is what I would like to say.
Thank you, Lola. I came in contact with Lola's work through Solutions Journalism Network, but I actually came into it by getting the postcards. Nina Fascio, who's our international coordinator and European manager, had posted in our internal Slack that there was this thing coming out, and I signed up for the postcards, and every 2 weeks I would get this beautiful work in my email inbox. And so I, as a viewer, as an audience member, I thank you very much. So thank you, Lola. There is one, before we go to Marco, there was just one question that had come through that I, on Twitter that I wanted to address. We don't, at Solutions Journalism, and I'd love for your perspective as well, we don't think about this as positive news. So there was a question that sort of brought together two things that is why would we cover the positive coming out of an IPCC report, because we wouldn't cover the Ukrainian war in a positive way. We wouldn't say that weapons are a good solution. I may argue with the logic of conflating those two things together, and I'm happy to speak with the person who put the tweet out, but I wondered if any of you wanted to take on like this sense of positive versus negative, and if you have any responses to that.
Yeah, in the case of Ukraine, I think always we can find a way that people are trying to do something to solve the problem. We cannot say that we are going to cover a war in a positive way. But last week in Outriders, some of us, we were in Ukraine, and I am writing a story about the amazing job that the Ukrainian railway is doing by continuing operating and making possible that people be evacuated from their areas. So there is always a way to learn that for the simple fact that the trains are working, thousands of people didn't die. So this is a way, I think, that of course is not positive, and we can find a lot of problems, and we can later think how to solve that. We are not going to say weapons are good, but how people are organizing themselves, how they are really creating networks to, with restaurants to cook for 4 million refugees. I think it's a way to address the problems with a solution approach.
Thank you, Lola. Marco, I sort of think maybe your entire presentation might sort of answer this question on why, and so why should we embrace climate change? So I'm going to turn it over to you. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I put this title to my presentation, and this title maybe seems to be very provocative, but not in my opinion, to be honest, because I don't like journalists who talk about fighting against climate change. I think it's a very stupid way to try to explain to the people what we have to do to tackle this climate, this big climate challenge. I think that we have already a lot of warfare in our society. We don't need to use these kind of words. So I decided to use a different word that, in my opinion, it's more constructive. Embrace climate change. Of course, you don't have to, take this word as a lot of resignation. I'm not saying you have to resignate to climate change. Of course, we have to take measurements in terms of mitigation. In terms of carbon capturing, CO2 capturing. But the thing is that the technologies for this are not really ready right now, are not reliable. So we have to wait a while for this. And on top of this, of course, if we want to see the effects of these carbon capture operations, we have to wait at least 10 to 15 years. So what are we doing meanwhile? We have to adapt. This is the starting point of my work. So this first image show you a part of Calabrian region. Here we took this image in the surroundings of Crotone, in the inland of Crotone, and it shows you how the local farmers are trying to cultivate a piece of lands that are already desertified. So the message coming from this picture, I think it's very constructive, because they don't want to abandon their land. They are just trying to find new ways to cultivate. So, and I think this is the same also for other people in Italy, maybe in Europe, maybe all over the world. Abandon our land is the last option. So, please, next. So, this is the path we are on today. Maybe you have heard this word, Anthropocene. It means that humans, the humankind, is at the very center of this era. Please, next. Just to give you some references, we are on top of this pyramid. Maybe during school time you have studied the different eras of the Earth evolution and human evolution. We are just on the top. So this word Anthropocene comes from a couple of American geologists who called our era Anthropocene. So I think it's very terrific. It's a terrific word. We have to think about that. Please, next. So this is just a joke. I grabbed it on a website, to be honest. But it's just to explain you what is the big fight, the very fight today, against climate denials. Yesterday I have attended a very interesting conference of Michael Mann, the father of the hockey stick. The scheme which shows us how the temperature grew up in the last centuries. Well, he also claimed that a lot of things are to be done against climate denials. We have a lot of climate denials. So we passed through the blue strip, we passed through the orange strip. I think right now, nowadays, we are in the red part of the line. So now we know that we have a big problem, and we know that humans are in the center of this problem. Now we are trying to embrace these changings, to take some measurements, to trying to skip the yellow part of the line. So please, next. Well, as I said in my in the first part of my introduction, I used to be a National Geographic contributor for many years. So this image was taken in the Guatemalan jungle at the very beginning of this millennium. I switched on to climate change issues and topics. My profession, because I've seen on the ground how the world was changing very rapidly. I used to come back in the same place after a couple of years, and I've seen places changing all the time, very rapidly. So it was really shocking to me. It was really shocking. That's why I finally decided to talk about climate change, to cover these topics, but to cover these topics in a quite different way. Please, next. So this was very inspiring to me. It was like a fate for me, because I found this book and I found this sentence. Professor Leon C. Megginson from the Baton Rouge University, I think it's in Louisiana, maybe, told this sentence in a conference. According to Darwin's Origin of Species, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt. So this word could have been the driver of my work. So the word adaptation was misunderstood for a long time, very long time. First time that scientists and scholars probably told this word was in 1987. That was a very important year for the discussion on climate science, because it was the year of the Kyoto Protocol. So it was maybe the first time that someone used this word, adaptation. But for more than 30 years, it was totally misunderstood. So either normal people, wide public, or scientists or journalists, no one really understood what adaptation meant. I think that was very important that the last report of IPCC that was released just a few weeks ago, by the end of February, claimed that adaptation is an important, dramatically strategic measure to embrace climate change, to embrace climate crisis. Let's start to use this kind of things. Okay, so please go on. Coming over my work, as I said before, 4 years ago, I built up an independent journalistic project called Adaptation. This is actually a web doc. I don't know if you are familiar with this kind of journalist narrative. It's not really modern. It's modern just for us from South Europe, for Italy. But I took this idea from, the Anglo-Saxon media companies or media or journals and newspapers like, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, and so on, which already use this kind of journalistic narrative, digital 3.0 digital journalistic narrative. It was really interesting because I had the possibility to embed in the same journalistic product online a lot of things, a lot of stuff. I mean, videos, interviews, graphics, data visualization, 360 pictures, and so on, trying to give to the people an immersive way to go over to these kind of topics. I mean, to see things about climate change adaptation all over the world. So please go on. So this is just a few points about the project, just to explain you what adaptation is, a multimedia project. I'm to describe how humanity is adapting to the different and existing effects of the increase of average global temperature. But our main commitment is to raise awareness, promoting constructivity, building hopes. These are the three pillars of our work, because we think that if we talk to the people always in the same way about climate change, we will foster resignation. This is, in my opinion, a disvalue journalistic chain, a disvalue narrative chain. We have to change our narrative in climate change. We have to give hope. Please go on. So I will very fast show you some pictures from our work. The first story we have featured in our web doc is about the Netherlands. So we traveled out to the Netherlands, to cover different stories about, facing sea level rise effects, because maybe all of you know that the Netherlands has, two-thirds parts of its territory under the level of sea. So, in our opinion, it was a very interesting open lab to study and to cover this topic in the best way. So, this guy is Mark van Risselberghe. He's a farmer from the north side of the Netherlands, and he found a way to cultivate vegetables using seawater, salt water. So it was really incredible, because he now is, giving this knowledge and is transferring this technology to many other countries all over the world, mostly in Southeast Asia, where they have tsunamis, they have hurricanes, they have a lot of things. So this is very important, because possibly he's taking a big challenge, in terms of food security and food safety. So please go on. Of course, food, agriculture are one of the main topics we are covering all the time, because we have to we have to know that in the next years, maybe in 10 years, we will be 10 billion people on planet Earth. We just, have, nowadays we are 8 billions. But every year, I think we have at least 80 to 90 million units more in the world. It means that a new German country born every year. So we are growing and growing fastly. Okay. We are always in the Netherlands. This is an experiment to try to let the people live on the water. So they are building houses on the water like this. These are very innovative. Please go on. And they changed their minds about defending towns from sea storms. They no longer build dams and barriers, because are very unecological, are very unsustainable. So they changed their minds, and they use mud coming from dredging from the local ports and bays to build this kind of mud flats that have the possibility to cut the storms coming from the sea. And so they possibly have solved their problems. Please go on. In the last part of my presentation, this is Italy, this is Veneto region. This is the way local scientists found to try to reduce the salinity of the Venice lagoon. You know, we have a lot of criticity in Italy right now. One of this is the state of art is the life of the Venice lagoon. It's an important ecosystem. So they found a way, just cutting a piece of land. They drove the water coming from a river, the fresh water coming from a river onto the lagoon, and they finally solved their problem. So it seems very easy, but it's what they have done. So please go on very, very fast. Okay. So water is an important resource. We know this is a very important year because we have very drought conditions. So we have to save water. Another way we found to save water in Italy, this is a picture taken in Emilia-Romagna region, is to use the dirty waters coming from our houses, from industry process. We have to change, in this case, we have to make a big changing, because we have to change laws that not permit to use this water to cultivate or to make other things. But we know that we can do it. We can have clear water. Of course, we cannot, it's not drinkable water, but we can use it for sure to cultivate. It means to have a circular process and to use again this water. We have just 3% of fresh water all over the world. We don't forget. We must not forget this at all. Okay, please go on. So this is other ways we have covered, of course, climate change adaptation topics in our work. Starting from the webdoc, we also realized a series for Amazon Audible platform on podcasts. I'm talking about podcasts. The series is called Adaptation Italia. Please go on. Of course, we hope that in the future we will not watch longer, Clive films, because we don't need Clive film. We need reality. We need new stories about climate change. I think it's very important that a film like this has been done. Do you want to? Has been done. Maybe you know the story of this film, Don't Look Up. I hope in the future we could produce a film focused on climate change issues in the same way they did this kind of film on just to talk about criticities of scientists when they have to talk to politicians. This is the main topic. So now I just want to show you 1 minute teaser coming from our adaptation work. We are show you what we did in Trentino region after the Vaia storm that occurred by the end of 2018. We get back to Trentino 3 years after, in 2021. Please.
Thank you, Marco. And we do have 2 really good questions from Twitter. So I'd love to show that and then answer the questions.
Just one slide more and
Vigile fuoco, mi dica cosa succede? Siamo sotto acqua. Cercando di salire per andare a Santa Caterina. Sì, alberi ovunque in mezzo alla strada. Lucerna avanti per la centrale.
So the final statement is, we can go next to the last one. If you want resilience and adaptation, you need community. If you want community, you need constructive communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you all. I'm a little teary because that last just got me. I live in an area of the United States where we've had an increase in extreme storms, and our forests are being decimated by those storms, so I appreciate that. I do want to honor the 2 people who sent in great questions. So the first is actually directed at Lola. You talked about having more interest in newsletters than you expected. Can you talk about how your stories performed and what were the metrics that you were using to monitor them?
Yeah, in fact, we had a newsletter for the Polish community because our work is published in Polish and English, and we released this newsletter in English, and really we didn't expect that so many people are going to subscribe. I don't have the exact number right now, so I cannot reply this. Maybe Piotr is around here could do it, but it was something really in the first weeks, and on social media, everybody was writing about this amazing postcard. I remember that even someone asked if it would be possible to buy the paintings from a postcard from Galicia. So it was really an amazing feedback, but I cannot give the numbers now because I don't have them, so I don't want to say something that is wrong.
Great, thank you, Lola. So Ashley, feel free to touch base with Lola, so thank you. And to any of them around metrics. So the last question, which I think is just a great one, is we've talked about solutions journalism as a way of how we report the news. And I think, Marco, you've shown very clearly this concept of where do we put this? Where do we put our messages? Where? And so the question, one that I wanted to address to Sahana, such as in India, people consume media via WhatsApp. Younger generations, it's on TikTok. How are we thinking about where we put our solutions journalism in addition to how we do the stories? And Sahana, if you'd like to take that one.
So I think it would vary from media house to media house on what are the ways they want to use for engagement. I think a lot of us have used Reels as well to put solutions content out there. But there's also a catch, because you would need somebody to also monitor these social media channels if you're using them to a large extent, because yesterday there was a very interesting session on the role of readers, editors, or public editors. And in this day and age, social media managers, their roles have evolved to take on these kind of roles. When you put a story out on social media or on our Facebook page, for example, a story on tree plantation, so that might get polarized views. Somebody would say, oh, this is a very nice thing, and somebody would say, a section would say, oh no, but look at this, this would lead to negative impacts in the future. So then you got to embrace those kind of comments and maybe use that to develop another storyline from those kind of comments. So I think where you put your stories is equally important as how you tell them and your writing. So yeah, I think it's become more complex depending on which channels you use to promote your stories. So yeah, we need specialized people to also look at that side of storytelling or media. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And I know we do need to leave the room, but I wanted to just say a round of thank you to Marco and Lola and Sahana. Thank you so much.